Many of you are here. Good afternoon. Welcome to everybody, and thanks for joining us. My name is Doug Newman. I'm the Executive Director here at the Cedar Rapids Metro Economic Alliance. Obviously, we'd rather all be hosting you in person at Policy on the Rocks, which has been a very successful, very fun, important legislative networking event over the past couple of years. But COVID, as it has with so much else, has forced us to once again rethink an event, and we didn't want to give up this opportunity to advocate the business voice to our state policymakers. And so we've got this event today, and I certainly appreciate that so many have registered. The Economic Alliance, HEDCO, MEDCO, and the Marion Chamber of Commerce are co-sponsoring this, felt that this would be an effective way to have our voice heard together. And I think from the turnout today, well over 100 people registered, and I think you'll see our numbers here go well over 100. Certainly sends a statement that we may have hit on something here. During this year's legislative session, in lieu of those treks across Interstate 80 and the snow and the wind that we're used to in a legislative session, instead, we're planning a series of these virtual public policy panel discussions to speak directly to area legislators about timely issues most important to the business community. And this is the first of those today. Today's discussion is going to focus on issues of economic growth policy, issues that we believe will aid in our region's recovery from the pandemic, from the derecho, from the crazy year that 2020 dealt to all of us. I'm excited about the panel we have today discussing these issues. And before we get to the panel, I also want to acknowledge our state elected leaders who've joined us today. This is tricky to do in a virtual environment. I'm always nervous about doing this even in a live environment and looking around the room and making sure I didn't miss anybody. But I can't really scroll through the panel here right now. But I do know that ahead of time we had confirmations from, and I hope are joining us on the call today, from Senator Rob Hogue, from Senator Liz Mathis, from Senator Dan Zumbaugh, from Representative Art Stade, and from Representative Tracy Aylert. We had hoping to join us, tentative, but they weren't positive, from Representative Kirsten Running Marquardt, Senator Todd Taylor, Representative Liz Bennett. Also, certainly appreciate hearing from a couple folks that wanted to join us but had schedule conflicts. We did hear from Representative Molly Donahue and from Representative Eric Jurdy that they wanted to join us but did have conflicts today, and appreciate them letting us know about that and still being committed to this event. I hope that covers everybody. I think there was one or two we hadn't heard from. If there are others on, thank you, and we'll try to circle back later to acknowledge you. But thank you all legislators. Thank you for joining us today to listen to the challenges, to the solutions, to the policy agenda of the business community, particularly around these economic growth issues that we'll talk about today. For all of the attendees, if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A section. We're going to do our best to get to them during the follow-up after the initial panel speech. So please give us your questions and we'll get through those. And now I'm going to turn this over to my friend, Kim Downs from Hiawatha, to take us the next leg of this.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug, and welcome everybody again. I'm Kim Downs, the City Manager for the City of Hiawatha, and I'm excited today to be representing our HEDCO, who is our Economic Development Corporation as well. I have the honor of introducing our panelists today, Mark Cottrell, Karen Kurt, Menard Dushek, and Chad Pelley. We'll start with Mark Cottrell. He is a serial entrepreneurial and real estate developer based in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Through his 40 years of professional career, he has been involved with numerous tech startups in real estate development and community economic development initiatives. He has a graduate in physics from the University of Northern Iowa and Harvard's AMDP real estate program. Mr. Cottrell currently serves on the Iowa Economic Development Authority Board, as he has served on numerous industry, state, regional, and economic development organizations. So welcome to Mark.
Thank you.
And then next we have Karen Kurt, who is the Executive Director of East Central Iowa Council of Governments. Around here, we call that ECI-COG. ECI-COG is a regional planning agency that serves as the economic development district for Benton, Iowa, Johnson, Jones, Lynn, and Washington counties. Karen is a native of Cedar Falls. Prior to joining ECI-COG, Karen was the city manager of Platteville, Wisconsin, and assistant city manager for Edna, Minnesota. Karen has a bachelor's degree in industrial relations from Cornell University in Etocha, New York, and a master's degree in urban regional studies from Minnesota State University. Welcome to Karen. Bernard Duchik is the Vice President of Corporate Development at IMON Communications. He is helping IMON to grow its footprint across Eastern Iowa through internally funded expansion efforts and private-public partnerships to meet the exponentially increased demand for bandwidth. Bernard grew up in Cedar Rapids and has earned his undergrad degree from Iowa State. After his undergrad, he spent time in Florida, in Georgia, working for Rockwell Collins and Bandeg Incorporated, while also earning his MBA from the University of Central Florida, and has a master's in management information systems from Nova Southeastern University. Welcome to Bernard. And lastly, but not least, Chad Pelley. Chad Pelley joined Amen Companies in August 2013 as business development manager for both Fusion Architects Incorporated and Compass Commercial Services. Chad graduated from the University of Iowa in 2001 with a bachelor's of science degree in civil engineering and became a registered professional engineer in 2006. In that time, Chad has fulfilled project management duties on numerous land development projects throughout the corridor. Chad has managed projects that include comprehensive mixed-use residential, commercial, and industrial developments. And before handing the lead over to Nick Glue, we would like to thank each of you for sharing your perspectives today and helping us advocate important issues, as Doug mentioned earlier. All right, Nick, they're all yours.
Okay, thank you, Kim. We appreciate that. And again, we appreciate the time of all of our panelists to help us today just talk about various issues. Again, our focus today is really around economic growth policy. And so we have several different topics that we intend to dive into a little bit. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to ask and facilitate conversation on a series of questions around a series of topics. And then when we get to the end of our time, we want to provide an opportunity for our legislators to react, ask some questions back on perhaps some things that we've talked about. We want to make sure that we're equipping them with just great background and understanding on some of the tools that we anticipate will come up throughout the legislative session. And then we also want to reserve some time, hopefully, for any of you to ask some questions in the end as well before we adjourn. So with that, we're just going to go ahead and dive in with a question really for each of you who are on our panel today. And let's start with Bernard on this particular question. And I'm going to ask this to each of you. What challenges from the pandemic, or gee, we also had that derecho, from your clients or customers, what challenges are your organizations still addressing? And what are you doing to address those challenges? And then beyond that, is there anything that the state should be doing to further support you and your challenges or your customers' challenges?
Yeah, I will start off with, just the compounding effect of the two events was something that was really amazing. Pandemic's one thing, you get that under your belt and you start feeling good, and then you get August 10th happens, and next thing you know, 100% of our network's down. So, but I am going to split into two. From the pandemic perspective, first and foremost is keeping our workforce safe. And telecommunication workers are deemed essential workers, so we don't have the luxury necessarily, and the work just can't be done from home. You have to be out in the community. So making sure we have the right protocols and the processes and the procedures in place. And that's kind of an ever-changing story as well as different things come out. So that first and foremost is our everyday challenge, which continues to this day. The second piece we really face with the pandemic, though, is making sure our culture stayed strong and intact. When half your company goes home, we try to pride ourselves in a very collaborative culture. So we really had to get creative with coming up with virtual events and employee drive-by meals, happy hours, bingo nights, and that online. So, that was definitely a challenge and really stretched us, and we came through creatively. Hats off to people at I'm On. But also our views on collaborative culture go beyond just I'm On and really extend into the communities we serve. And so we've been trying to increase the number of free public Wi-Fi spots within the different communities, getting people access to Wi-Fi hotspots, either by helping to fund some of those at the different communities or whatever, and just try to increase ways for people to keep safe, affordable, or get safe and affordable internet due to the current situation with folks at home or whatever the case may be. So from a pandemic perspective, what can the state do? Really, it's now when the distribution of the vaccine comes out, making sure that utility workers are in the correct, I'll say the correct priority. We're definitely not ahead of healthcare workers, but we also want to make sure we're in the appropriate priority there as that gets discussed, because we do have many people still out in the field every day and really have to be. Then let me switch to the derecho. So we're used to handling tornadoes, severe thunderstorms. Frequently it'll take down parts of our network. But on August 10th, I got a text that 100% of our plant in Cedar Rapids, Marion, Hiawatha was down. And that was just unfathomable to me. 100%. We're a fiber company. We have fiber in the ground. And that, how does that go down? Well, what you saw was some of those giant trees as they tipped over just took the whole easement out and even tore up underground lines. So it was simply amazing. We had 135,000 feet damaged, down, a third damaged, or in many cases just simply missing. We have no idea where it went or where it ended up. We found some of it, but 30 hubs offline, 9 generators damaged. We had one hub condemned, and the list goes on. We had 1 satellite destroyed, and so our off-air feeds were down. But happily, our core and our connection to the larger world stayed intact. And so we were able to immediately start, all right, a day at a time to start, coming back online. We feel very positive about where we're at today. And this is thanks to I'm On employees, but as well as the collaboration with other utilities and city employees in that. And it really did and does still take a village to come back from an event like that. And we're seeing cases where our network is even stronger than before, which is good. But make no mistake, this was a very, very expensive setback for us. Unfortunately, fiber lines are not insurable, and much of our fiber was what was damaged, and so that's uninsurable. So this was a really expensive setback for us financially, as well as we had plans to grow quite a bit during the second half of the year, which immediately went on hold. So things the state could do is at one time there was discussion around recovery funding and support was going to include private utilities, privately owned utilities. And I don't think that ever happened. So we would love to see if that could possibly come to fruition. Other things is cities continue to grow and build, which is great, but road projects typically cause us to have to relocate lines, or whatever the case may be. I'm not asking people to stop repairing roads or putting in roundabouts or whatever, but just keep in mind the utilities as you plan those out. And discussions can really help us just schedule those so it keeps everybody kind of happy in that. So other things the state could do in this area would be just as funds come up, looking at the accuracy of the broadband data for those places, as well as the funding of some of these initiatives. Today, they're really for places that have nothing, versus we would like to see it more to allow for overbuilding of things, because it's not just having a connection, it's having a quality broadband connection. And today, some of those broadband funds are kind of held back because, well, someone's there. It may not be a quality connection. It may not really meet the current need, but because someone's there, it kind of limits the effectiveness of what you're trying to do with those broadband funds. So
Thanks, Bernard. I think I almost want to say, can I get an amen on that from this group? I think as we all have navigated our different situations and working. What I would recommend to you when it comes to road projects, Bernard, if you're building fiber in Marion, when you get to those intersections, just start going in a circle when you get to corners.
That's right.
It'll save you money in the future.
Yeah.
So I want to pivot and hear from a couple folks who are really involved on the real estate side of things. Mark Cottrell, I'll ask you this same question next, as far as kind of the challenges that you and your team have been navigating in this year of a pandemic, and again, how you see ways that the state might play a role in supporting your industry.
Thanks, you guys, and hello from the northern outposts of the corridor here. I see some familiar Cedar Falls and Waterloo faces around here, so happy to be with you today. Let me just speak from the perspective of Main Street. I'm just going to speak in terms of probably Main Street, Iowa, in any one of the communities that are there. The interesting thing that I think that we saw this year was it really was, kind of a three strikes you're out sort of a year for Main Street. Main Street is really comprised of hospitality sort of institutions. It's really retail institutions, and it's really, events and sort of special kind of community gathering things. The interesting part of that is obviously no one's traveling. Retail went almost entirely online this year. And, the biggest thing that people are concerned about is when is it appropriate to socialize and how? And, unfortunately, though, that is, I think, going to be with us for at least a good portion of 2021. That's, I think, the current thinking that at least we're using in planning overall on it. I would say that, what can the city do? And I've actually said this on, a number of our board calls and meetings that I've had with Director Durham and the governor as well. It's consistency. It's just plain consistency of messaging. Give us clear guidelines on what we should be doing. Tell us when realistically we can expect things to change, and then we can plan. It's the problem of this, this last year is no one knows how to plan. Events take, literally sometimes, months and years to put together. People are trying to make staffing decisions and any number of things. It's been really a godsend to sort of have as best a communication as we can. And really, I think that's about, the best that we can do. We did find out, I know Senator Mathis was on the IEDA board call this morning. It sounds like there's more funding that's coming, thankfully, for the really hard hit hospitality and food and beverage sector. I mean, honestly, those folks are doing the best that they can just to try and keep their doors open. The good news, and I'll just sort of end with a positive note, is we've all been through this before. We've all been through 2008. We've all been through 2016. Lord knows we don't need to have pandemics and derechos on top of each other. Those are the kind of challenges that nobody can plan for, and we've got to get through. But, I think we've all proven that we will stand up and we'll fight through this. A lot of good things are going to happen. I know some of the other questions we're going to talk about it are sort of what are the new rules and what are the new opportunities, but I'm confident we have a well-run state and a well-run set of communities. I think we'll come through fine.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. For those of you who've not had a chance to meet Mark in some of these forums before, and frankly might be thinking, why is the Cedar Falls guy on our call here? Mark is obviously a very successful entrepreneur and real estate developer, has had a lot of success in the Cedar Falls market. And you may have seen is in the process of developing a series of similar investments in our core Uptown district here in Marion. So we're really excited to have him as a part of our development community here on the southern end of the Cedar Valley region. We're gonna adopt you. So thank you, Mark, for being here. Chad Pelley, also from a real estate perspective, same question: challenges you're navigating, ways that you see the state can assist.
We've shared some of the similar issues that everyone else is internally with culture, communication, and all those similar issues. I think for us, the biggest thing we're seeing is the stressors on the service industries, the retail tenants, The residential honestly seems fairly strong for us. We haven't had major issues, but there's a lot of negotiating terms of leases. And there's quite frankly just a whole slew of tenants that are teetering on what I would say the brink of uncertainty and closure. Um, just from a time standpoint, I think for us, I think it's a workforce concern as we keep moving forward. It always is. It seems to be when you layer the derecho in there, and I hate to say the word storm chasers, but you get of a lot of unsavory companies that slide into town, and it's just almost impossible to get workforce and contractors to do things. And from our standpoint, that obviously hinders us. I think education, as everyone else has mentioned, keeping everybody up to date on what to expect. I guess for us, if there was one thing that the state or the local governments could do is really just strengthen policies that protect anything that they can do to help keep those businesses open safely or get them back open safely. I think the sooner that occurs, the better off everybody will be and minimize that permanent closure.
Karen, I don't want to leave you out of this question. Any final thoughts on this question as far as challenges that remain and from your unique role at ECOG, what you see as far as opportunity for the state to support?
Thanks. And I recognize I'm a little bit of an outlier relative to the other speakers, so I'm going to be very, very brief. Most of my customers, so to speak, are actually local communities themselves. I think, we've just seen over time, it's been a series of adaptations as we've worked through this process. And I would echo what the other panelists have said in terms of, I think a quick and efficient rollout of the vaccine is really in the forefront of people's minds. And I also hear from our member communities and in turn, what they hear from businesses is it really both events, the derecho and COVID-19 have kind of exacerbated our existing stressors. Going back again to broadband, workforce, childcare is another one that comes up, both in terms of having slots available, but now in addition to that, just the financial viability of some of our childcare providers. And while our communities aren't necessarily reporting, widespread business closures, they're deeply concerned about some of the sectors of their business community, hospitality, tourism, and some of the other areas that have been mentioned before.
I'm going to throw this next question just out to all of you. We don't all need to respond to it, but I'm curious your perspective on what has changed permanently related to business models, related to growth areas that we've seen. What do you see as permanent changes? And what are some things that maybe are more temporary in nature that we anticipate will kind of return to normal or a new normal at some point? Any of you to answer that question?
I'll take a run at one, and I'm sure several of the other panelists would want to stick on the same thing. We're obviously not most interested, but awfully interested in what's going to happen in the office environment. With 30% of the folks nationally being surveyed saying they're, you even hear the words COVID shy, very unsure of when to go back into the office or how to go back into the office. I think almost everybody's struggling with the question of what do offices look like? Is there sort of a new hybrid model with remote workers there? I think that's a huge question for all of our communities. I'll tell you, I think it has also an interesting bright side, maybe not for real estate folks, but overall, I think, with the shortage of workforce that we've had, one of the big changes permanently is I've spent a fair amount of time with some of our tech folks that are working around the state, and they're saying they're hiring people now from literally all over the country. And where it's been sort of a real problem, how do you get somebody to move to Iowa, and where's Iowa, and geez, don't you have mountains or oceans there? Fine. If you really want to live in one of those places, maybe that's fine, but there's an opportunity to work for a good Iowa company. So I think it could have a double-edged sort of impact, and I do think that's permanent.
Interesting. Who else? Permanent, temporary changes? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I'll come at it from the from the internet for the broadband perspective, of course, and just, yeah, we saw a distinct usage increase last March, April, a very dramatic spike, and it continues to spike up. It did not really reach a plateau, which we thought it might, but it continues to increase. And really, the home interconnect connection has gone from more personal entertainment, and I think it was already headed there too. It's now a critical piece of infrastructure that jobs and education depend on. And that's not coming back. I think that will always stay. It's not going to go back to just kind of, it's nice to have type of thing. And like I said, it was already headed there, but this just drove that home. So our business model that I'm on around the urgency to respond is having to change. And so we're shifting to how do we be even more responsive. We always tried to be responsive, but it's even more required now. And that quality of your connection is now very important. And that I don't think that's going to change back. And so what you're seeing in our industry is just that. And so, and I will echo from a business perspective, our views on permanent remote workers is certainly evolving and changing. Whereas before I'd say, oh no, let's get them to move up here. Now it's, yeah, why not? Why not? We've proven we can be productive in kind of a remote environment for certain positions. So that's really a business model change for us as well.
I would say we're really watching the area of retail. There's obviously a shift retail was already in flux even before the pandemic with shifting to online sales. The pandemic just increased that. And so what is that going to mean for our bricks and mortar retail operations? And as planners, is that something we need, we're going to need to be thinking about? Are we going to have space that communities are going to need to plan for, potentially repurposing, because that's been a permanent change.
Chad, from your perspective, as you've seen some of your tenants who have pivoted to supporting the online market. Is that starting to influence the amount of square feet that people are ultimately going to need? Is that something that will forever change that landscape, or do you view that as still a temporary thing as people get more comfortable coming back into the retail world?
It's a lot of uncertainty. And I think what we've learned is we're going to have to be nimble and ready for the uncertainty. I think from the office setting, you're going to have the two sides, those folks that are home, the folks that are there. I think from our standpoint is having space that's flexible. The days of the long-term 5 and 10-year leases and some of the language that's occurring in leases based on, upsets to business and things of that nature that are outside of anyone's hands, like the derecho, are going to be commonplace. From our standpoint, I think being able to reuse and readapt space quickly and easily and flexibly with some of that modular furniture, for example, in lieu of permanent walls, things of that nature. From our standpoint, we're just awakened and aware at this point that anything is possible, and to plan and predict that is not going to be possible. Therefore, what can we do in the future to pad ourselves or be prepared for? And that's kind of where we're going to be headed personally. Like everyone else has mentioned, retail was already headed online predominantly. Again, I'll iterate it twice. If we don't do something drastic soon or get back safely, business are going to continue to fail. And those are the services in the offices that I see the small businesses really are suffering the most from our standpoint.
Bernard, I want to come back to you as we kind of switch and dig in a little bit more to this topic of broadband. For those of you that saw the governor's as she unveiled her budget last week, you'll know that she threw a bigger number than we've ever seen as far as potential broadband support, suggesting that the state would spend $150 million a year for the next 3 years in broadband expansion. Talk a little bit about how, your perspective from IMON, how do you guys look at those resources that are being contemplated to be made available across the state, and how important are those dollars to really overcoming these challenges that we face? Or Are they anywhere near enough?
Yeah, we love the direction it's headed, without a doubt. But the devil gets into the details, of course, that there's been quite a bit of federal money out there before, and it's how it's been applied. And like I said, who is eligible for that, whereas it really starts to lose its effectiveness. And that speaks to my earlier comment. So we are very excited, but again, we got to make sure we have good broadband, accurate broadband data, that those eligibility maps are working from. And we strongly encourage, it's not just if someone's there, it's a high quality connection is there. So overbuilding is allowed with those funds. And so, and we think there's some momentum to do that. So we're very pleased with seeing that. So, but we're also not waiting around for those funds, without a doubt. You know, that typically takes a long time. There's a long process. And so we are continuing to move things forward. You know, as I spoke about, the acceleration of the need is not slowing down. The acceleration of the need at home for students of need is also becoming more and more evident. So we're trying to bring more ways to connect students of need at greatly reduced cost to the family, or no cost in many ways, working with the school districts. And so we're pretty proud of that we've been able to do that in the communities we're in. So we can get all the students who need that connection at home, the connection they need. As I mentioned, we're expanding ways people can get just free public Wi-Fi. We're expanding into different communities and different parks around the communities. Marion's one of them we've been having discussions with. And so we're excited about that. We're always looking at new ways of getting, I'll say, bandwidth from the larger outside world. Today we're connected to Chicago and Minneapolis. We'll probably be adding a third one here over time, just because as the need goes up, that we have to get more, but then you also don't want to be dependent on a single route to Chicago, for example, and a backhoe takes out the whole state for us, or whatever the case may be. So you got to make sure you're redundant in that space as well. We're expanding our footprint as quickly as possible, and we're really working on how do we increase that pace as a small company. And so that gets into different methods of funding, different methods of ways we build, and different methods of way we collaborate with different communities, and different ways we can partner with communities. And we've had great success with the communities we're in, and we'll continue to look forward to that collaboration, excuse me. But we're also looking at new ways to deliver that bandwidth. Fiber is always the best way. A fiber to the home or the building is always the best way. But there are other technologies that, until we can build out an area, we're piloting ways to do point to multi-point Wi-Fi, that we can provide service to a small business or to a small neighborhood that's been developed kind of on the fringes of our footprint. Not really new, it's a new application for us, is something we're working with. Ways government can help, obviously funding, you mentioned that is great, and we look forward to that. But on a day-to-day basis, just making the right-of-way process easier so we can put in lines is always appreciated. Helping with access to utility poles can really make a difference in how quickly we can build out, or how cost effectively. Simply encouraging developers and city planners to include us early in the process, like they would power and water. I think now making sure you include telecommunications early in that process is really key, and just we really strongly encourage that. So those are some of the ways I think we can really continue to accelerate this growth. So.
Mark and Chad, this next question is for you. We're going to talk a little bit about housing. I think all of our communities have their own unique challenges around housing, whether it's affordability or just availability. With the derecho especially, we know a lot of our housing stock was impacted in some way, kind of at all levels. What's the housing situation as you see it? And talk a little bit about how you've been able to leverage tools like workforce housing tax credits and why they're important. We have long been advocating for an increase to the number of credits that are available through this program each year. We are encouraged by the fact that the governor has suggested increasing this number significantly this year. What's your perspective on the topic of housing? And also, we'd love to know why those tools are so important to you. Mark, we can start with you.
Yeah, I was just going to give it to Chad first.
Well,
Okay.
then we'll go to Chad. Whatever.
Let
I'll
Chad
just-
speak first time this time.
Short and sweet. You know, what we see as far as challenges, again, you know, with the shortage of workforce, folks that are either out, as someone mentioned, COVID scared. Pricing on materials is just chaotic and crazy right now for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're optimistic in some of those in the first and second quarter coming into line. We've definitely utilized the workforce housing tax credits. Here's a quick statistic. Personally, since 2008, Almond Companies has used workforce housing on $125 million worth of projects in downtown Cedar Rapids alone. And put it just as bluntly as I can, without workforce housing tax credits and sometimes layered with Grayfield, Brownfield, and the local incentives, we cannot bring quality projects to fruition at all. This last couple of years, while the workforce housing has been designated for small communities, we have done very little for housing. And it's based on those gaps that we just cannot fill and keep things affordable in our market.
See, that's why I let him go first. He made all the good points, and now all I have to do is fill in. So I think he's just said it exactly right. I mean, Nick, your comment about we have aging housing stocks in pretty much all of our communities, I think that's exactly right. But it's also, I think, important to remember that what we have is probably a lot of single family homes and for sale products specifically. And if there's sort of anything that young people and honestly old people and probably the kind of people that we want to move to our communities is they're looking for a multitude of options. They're looking for duplexes. They're looking for condos. They're looking for brownfield. They're looking for urban living. They're looking for, you know, a number of different housing types. And almost every single one of those is better built in an existing location as opposed to on the edge of town in an area that used to be a cornfield. If any of you follow Strong Towns, and it's a great little blog that you can follow. I mean, they went so far as last year to say, you know, every community should just stop expanding their infrastructure from where they are right now. Our population isn't growing, so it's really a question of how do we add density and how do we add these different kind of housing options. And, you know, really fundamentally without the layered incentives that Chad just spoke on, they're just not possible. Singly, in the project that we're doing in Marion, very expensive piece of ground, but then even after you're done with that, then you have the demolition, you have the utility upgrades that have to be done. But if you're not rebuilding a community from the center out there, I don't think we're going to see those different kind of housing stocks. And that's what young people want to move here and what older people want to stay here.
Thanks, Dichi, for your comments on that. And of course, I think from our economic development organization standpoint, we continue to stand firmly behind the success of programs like workforce housing tax credits. So I think specifically on that, we would love to continue for the legislators on the call, more anecdotal, you know, real stories of how these programs are impacting, in this particular case, housing. Please challenge us to continue to come up with those stories for you as you're advocating for this program in Des Moines. So we thank you in advance for that. So Karen, I want to come to you and kind of combine these last two questions together. Housing, broadband, we know those issues, at least as we've talked about it, they're rural and urban issues. But what are you hearing about those two topics as you work with some of your member communities who oftentimes are in more rural settings within our region? And I think you're
Karen, you're muted.
Okay,
There we go.
it'd be hard for me to make my point on mute.
That's
I
okay.
was just saying that we would also put in a plug for the Strong Towns website. We think it's really important to be smart in fully utilizing existing infrastructure before building new infrastructure because it's so expensive. And I would kind of second some of what Bernard said. I think when we talk to our rural communities, there's the residents that are truly out in the country that may lack access at all. But then we also hear from communities that they're concerned about their provider or the quality of service that they have. So I thought that your points were spot on with some of what we're hearing. Pivoting over to the housing issue, I think everything that's been said applies really well to the urban area as well as some of the rural areas that are in close proximity to a metro area. So I'm going to spend a moment and maybe focus a little bit more on parts of our region that are not as easily within commuting distance and maybe don't function quite the same way with respect to being kind of a quasi-bedroom community. And so there was one of the things that the governor had in her budget, which would increase funding for our housing trust funds. And we think that's an incredibly valuable tool, both in the urban and the rural area. The housing trust funds are very, very flexible, and we manage a couple here at ECOG, and we've used it to help with down payment assistance, to help close financing gaps on projects, multifamily projects and housing rehabilitation. I second what Mark said, especially when you go out in those really rural areas, you have very aged housing stock. And so grant rehabilitation programs and investing in rehabilitation, those homes are just in need of some love. And I think when you're designing those programs or thinking about those programs, the metric shouldn't always be around growth or new, because for some of these communities, they're really maybe not in a position where they're going to be growing, and it's about maintaining the quality of life for the people that are there. And I think lastly, there was a piece of legislation that came up last year with respect to land banks. And that's something we also are very, very interested in. We see sometimes in some communities where they get into what I would describe as a cycle of disinvestment, meaning you've got a few dilapidated properties, and then that sort of acts like a cancer on the rest of the community, where other people aren't making investments because they don't see the return on the value because of what's around them. And land bank trusts are a tool, another tool that could be in the toolbox for these communities to be able to address those dilapidated properties, take control, and either clear them or rehab them and get them back on the tax rolls in a productive way and kind of remove that cancer out of that community.
Great. Thank you, Karen. One more question, this one to Chad and Mark, and then legislators on the call. We'd love to open it up for any questions that you have back on some of these topics. Last question is about brownfield, grayfield tax credits. We kind of touched on some of the characteristics as to why they're important just a moment ago, but as many of you know, our metro area has actually utilized this program more than any other area in the state over the last several years. This is a program that actually, if the legislature does not take action, will sunset. And so again, the governor has initially proposed to extend that for 10 years, increase it from $10 to $20 million a year. We are 100% behind that. But to Mark and Chad, can you give us some examples so that people that maybe don't live in the real estate world can understand these specific projects, the wheres and the whys, that these tax credits are so important to us as we're developing projects?
Chad, I'll take a run at this one first, and you can end it big. So I'd say brownfield is one of the most valuable tools in the toolbox for us. TIF is wonderfully flexible. It really has, I think, unfairly, lots of times taken a lot of criticism, but I think it's because it's so flexible and it's so ubiquitously used. I think brownfield is probably second only there. And let me give you an example. And Karen and Chad both and I spoke about this. I mean, I think almost every project anymore is better off in an area where you can go into a block, and we really look at a block as a project this time. So there's private development that happens, but there's also street work that's likely to be done. There's probably environmental remediation, especially in in an area that maybe had old manufacturing or something that was involved into it. I mean, those are the kind of things that appraisers actually put a negative value on, and banks are really not in a big hurry to lend money on either. So you really have that question of, how do I at least get back to a shovel-ready site so that I can really think about bringing my project forward? In Cedar Falls, we used brownfield extensively. We had an old auto wrecking area that now has a public plaza on it, and is, I think, going to be the real gems in the downtown area. Marion, we were very fortunate in not only was the brownfield already approved in that project, but there's a lot of work going on in the adjacent, I'll call it Central Square, where the plaza area is going to be developed. I mean, it's that kind of public-private partnership and tools like brownfield that really make these projects happen. And to a project, I think, when people come back and they say, that's an amazing project, how did that happen? You almost always find a brownfield underneath of it. It's got a very high ROI on it.
Chad?
Same for us. These Grayfield Brownfield tax credits are used to kind of clean up open wounds in the communities. They're either going to be vacant and falling down structures or dirty sites. And those price tags that come along with cleaning them up are too high for our market to absorb. And I'll give you an example. We purchased the old Terex plant down between Coe and Mount Mercy colleges, and the cleanup on that's going to exceed $2.5 million. So as you can appreciate, in a neighborhood that's already slightly struggling, it's in a working class neighborhood with an old plant, just to get to ground zero, you're spending a couple $1 million. It really sets a project back, and without the Grayfield Brownfield program, we really can't even look at those. I think, again, Mark said it, it's a partnership between the state, the city, the developers, the communities, and that's how we view it. And without layering these programs, they're just not possible. Cedar Rapids has done a wonderful job for us. Working down in the Nubo is the biggest project I can think of. We did the old steel plant behind the market, Geometric, where the ray gun is in Nubo Station. None of those would have been today if we didn't have these programs layered on top of each other. And so for us, we all have that common interest, the community, as well as the developers and the people and folks that live and work and play there, to see these happen. I can't advocate enough. You said 10 to 20 million. Let's get that thing to 50. I mean, if you've ever sat in one of those awards at the state, there's like $1 billion of requests and 10 million doesn't go far. It's unfortunate. And so, again, we support these projects and jobs are created. I mean, construction sector is one of the largest employers out there. Without our projects moving forward, and when I say ours, all of the state's projects, there's a lot of jobs that you can imagine trickle down to suppliers, not just the laborers and others that are involved.
We often, as we advocate for these programs, talk about supporting the tools that have some of the strongest ROI. We would loudly say that this is one of those tools that has that very strong ROI. So thank you for that perspective. We only have a handful of minutes left here, and we want to make sure to respect your time here late on a Friday. Thank you for joining us. Let's just pause, and I know we have several of our legislators who've taken time to listen to these remarks over the last few minutes. We want to open it up, and if there's any additional perspective or questions that you'd like to offer, we specifically set this up as a Zoom meeting versus a webinar so that we can have an open dialogue. So I'll just pause there and get out of the way here for just some informal dialogue. Any of you are free to speak.
Great. Thanks, Nick. This is Rob Hogue, State Senator from Cedar Rapids. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. What a great program. I apologize. I had to step out for a couple minutes there to take an important phone call. But Look, I really appreciate the input, the housing, the brownfields. That's all critical work. The job one to me still seems to be, stopping and getting control of this virus. Because until we do that, nothing comes back as fully as we'd like. And I really appreciate the comments about how life will change post public health emergency. But the fact is, we're in a public health emergency. Job one for the Iowa legislature should be helping stop the virus and get it under control, because I think that's the key to unlocking our economy. But I really did like the other input. And the thing I would say is, I think you can get bipartisan support for some of those concepts. Try to dampen the desire of the Republicans. I'm just going to make some broad strokes here. Dampen the desire of the Republicans for deep tax cuts, because that then deprives them of the revenue they need to do some of these targeted economic development concepts that really make communities better and quality of life and our economy stronger. I'm not saying they can't do anything. I'm just trying to say, as you advocate, try to dampen that desire. And I love the idea, 50 million for brownfields and gray fields. Good idea. Can't afford it if on this other hand, we're, giving up 100 million in revenue because of some other tax cut. So thank you for the input. It was fantastic. Everybody stay safe. I dropped my email in the chat. I know other people have. Please keep in touch.
Thank you, Senator.
So I produced a bill last year that would increase brownfield, grayfield tax credits and would make a slight difference to the formula. So it didn't go anywhere, didn't get picked up. I'm in the minority. But I heard Debbie Durham on the HEDCO call, Kim, talk about, how she was going to do broadband expansion. And then she mentioned brownfield, grayfield. So I called her immediately and said, hey, did you see my bill last year? She said, no. So Shodatori said, okay, you're going to get with my people. And so we pulled in Lon Pluckin from the city of Marion, who Lon and I have talked about this for probably 3 years, in how do we also give smaller towns like Marion, smaller towns like Cedar Falls, Mark, places, give them a chance when they're going up against Des Moines and Cedar Rapids and, the bigger cities. So all the tax credits are wiped out by the time, Marion wants to do something, or, so how could we, if we increase the amount, how could we slightly change the formula to allow for smaller towns to get in there and at least not be way back in the queue and never get up to the front? So they are working on it. And Deanna Triplett, who is in charge of that, today she was on the board meeting, Mark, and they're talking through that along with the increase. So we could certainly ask for a higher appropriation too, but it would be if our colleagues across the aisle would, if they could hear what you were saying today, they might be swayed by that. So I think, IEDA, it needs to, maybe think about a higher appropriation, which we should talk about after today. And that would be very valuable. I kind of look at myself as a connector. So all of the programs that you were all talking about, amazing. The work we do at the legislature right now, it's an active session, bills, laws, codification. But what is already offered, especially for business, if you go on the IEDA website, amazing resources on there, amazing programs, and they're funded, maybe not fully funded, but I look at myself as a connector. So when a business asks, me to help them do something, I'll say, have you contacted IEDA? Here are some of your resources. We have a laundry list of resources that really help business. So a lot of the really good work I think I do is not during the session. It's when we're out of session and we're talking like with, Doug and Kim, HEDCO and MEDCO and CR, Metro Economic Alliance, when we have conversations, and even the CBJ comes in and they do some great work around just information gathering and dissemination. So that's where we really can get a lot more work done from things like this. We get your ideas and then we're able to go back to the legislature and hopefully agree on some of this.
Liz, Nick, is it all right if I just follow up on what Liz just said, that Senator Mathis just said? Sorry,
Yes,
I've known
please
you
do.
forever. A couple of things, and I think there was important points that both folks just said. A couple of things that I'd say. First of all, I was on Debbie's staff for a couple of years, and I think I've worked 20 years now with IEDA and 7 or something like that directors. And by far, we are blessed with the best economic director, I think, in my lifetime that we've ever had. She has an incredibly capable staff that are down there. She manages these programs very well. I'd like to maybe just do 1 second plug for Brownfield, and I'd like to do a 1 second plug for workforce housing, because I think that's probably 2 of the most oversubscribed programs that IEDA administers. And I think there's a real case study in both of them. For those who don't know, workforce housing is a program that basically, if you have a program or a project that qualifies for it, you register for it, they put you on a list, and it could be today or 10 years from today when there's sufficient funding to be able to really, honor that tax credit. I know IEDA has struggled with mightily how to sort of manage projects and make sure that all projects are treated well with that one. That's not the way to do it. And it's when I think in some cases legislators come in and say, okay, we want to make sure that some money goes for smaller communities and some go to larger communities or whatever the case may be. I mean, remember there's rulemaking, and there's also a really capable staff and program managers that if that's sort of what you want to see happen, have that discussion with them in rules would be my advice. Don't sort of take programs that are already short funded and then put rules on top of them legislatively that make it hard to make monies go out, because you'll have they won't fund right. That would be my first comment. Brownfield is a better example because it's a competitive program. And I think Karen just said it very well. I mean, it's interesting because you have to really have your case strong to go in front of that group and actually have a project funded. It makes for good projects. It also makes for, I think, good use of the monies that are appropriated for them. So I think good rulemaking and competitive programs that really drive good quality projects is what I would want to emphasize for you when you're thinking about things like this.
Thank you, Mark. So we are at 4 o'clock. I do, however, if there's any other legislators that would like to make a comment, please do so right now. Want to pause just long enough. Don't want to cut anybody off. Okay. Well, we'll probably end our conversation right there, and we really appreciate our panelists for providing their perspective. You are all just a wealth of information, so thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to my friend Jill Ackerman at the Marion Chamber to close us out here today.
Thank you, Nick. Great job on leading today's discussion. I am Jill Ackerman, president of the Marion Chamber, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I know we could have covered many more topics, but as Nick mentioned, fortunately, we have a very accessible delegation representing us in Des Moines, and I'm confident that they're available for any follow-up questions you might have. Again, we want to thank them for their service, especially in today's challenging times. Our next panel discussion will be February 26th, so please mark your calendars. Again, that's February 26th, again at 3 p.m. We'll be focusing on issues that address our workforce challenges. Registration information from each of our partner organizations will be available very soon. Again, thanks to our legislators, today's panelists, my economic development partners across the Metro, and all of you for joining us today. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and thank you.